And so it's June. I'm speaking to you today from my porch. So I hope you can hear all the birds and bees and bugs and teeming life all around me. I love it so much. It's a funny thing about June. I feel a little ambivalent about its arrival because I know it will pass so quickly and it'll be gone for another year. So I'm being a little vulnerable here in admitting that, but maybe saying it out loud will help me let that go and just revel in it. Honestly, I think June is just about perfect. It's not so hot and buggy yet. The weather is generally lovely. The garden is coming in nicely. Flowers are blooming in their time. And the days are long as they're going to get, with the beautiful evenings lingering until you feel like your heart is going to burst in the delight of it. The warmth, the light, the fragrances, the lightning bugs. Catching lightning bugs was central to those long summer nights of my childhood. We would get the classic mayonnaise or pickle jar. I can still remember the smell. And poke holes in the lid with an ice pick and run or leap around the yard, catching them one by one with our hands, plunk them into the jar, and slap the lid on to keep them contained. We would gather a bunch before being called in for a bath and bed, but the magic would continue with the lightning bug lantern glowing into the night beside my bed, at least until I fell asleep. I don't love remembering how many of those mystical creatures we let die in those jars, but I do remember at some point choosing to catch and release after we were old enough to realize that the lightning bugs would never become pets. So thinking about those long summer evenings as a child, I'm reminded that I grew up in a time when summers were free. Really free. Once school is out, those days stretched before us like an endless strand of golden beads, each one rich with the possibilities of our whims and our imagination. We roamed the neighborhood, rode our bikes for hours on end, waded in the creek for what seemed like miles, went to the pool, laid around in the grass, built forts, and made up games. And at night, there would always be a game of kick the can, a competition that included all the ages and spanned the entire block. It was serious. Grass stains and skin knees were a guarantee as you ran and slid your way to that holy grail of a can that meant you were home free, if you made it without being tagged. Every night in the neighborhood were the sounds of shouting and laughter and cicadas, and then eventually the mothers calling, the dispersal, and goodbyes. We would go in, breathless, exhausted, and dirty from a day of blissful play. These days and weeks would be punctuated by family vacations, perhaps a beach trip or a visit to grandparents. And later on, there was camp. I adored camp. For a few years, I'd go away for a month in the summer, and I looked forward to it from the moment I left until it rolled around the next year. I feel so fortunate to have grown up this way. My own children had some degree of this summer freedom, but by then there were more offerings, more structure, more opportunities to pursue specific interests like dance or sports or music. These were good things, and they chose them and enjoyed them. But I grew up in a different time, and my memories are of a freedom that I'm so glad that I knew, and that I'm very much reminded of by those fireflies of June. And speaking of fireflies again, I'm going to tell you a story about an experience that changed my life. It was only a few years ago. We were at a farm-to-table event in Virginia and had opted to camp out on the property afterwards rather than drive home late. Predictably, I wasn't sleeping too well on this particular night. It was too warm and the ground was lumpy. It was somewhere in the wee hours that I crawled outside the tent to get some fresh air and made myself comfortable in the cool grass. That's when I saw it. In a stand of tall trees across the field, a mass of flickering white lights lit up like a giant Christmas tree. or the most amazing fireworks show, only it was silent. And the lights were pulsating with the presence of something very much alive, so that all of the trees were completely filled and sparkling. It was absolutely surreal and mesmerizing. I had to ask myself if I was actually awake, or maybe dreaming, or somewhere in between, or in some kind of otherworldly liminal space. The next morning, the owner of the property confirmed that what I'd seen was not only real, but an explainable phenomenon. It was mid-June, mating season for fireflies, and the grove of ash trees on the property was an ideal habitat and the perfect staging for what I consider to be the ultimate firework display. No noise or flammables or chemicals or projectiles, just one of the Earth's most amazing benevolent creatures going about its business without human interference. Since that time, I've done some research, and I've come to find out that some species of fireflies actually synchronize their flashes so that the glow is pulsating in unison. A rare sight that is limited to areas with the ideal conditions in regards to temperature, moisture, and the lack of artificial lighting. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park happens to be one of these places, and each year hosts a synchronous firefly viewing opportunity for 1 week during the peak mating period. But if you want to see this, you have to apply for a lottery. If you're selected from the lottery, that means you have a chance of getting one of the very limited slots for driving through the specified area at night and viewing this phenomenon. I'm so grateful to the National Park Service for being proactive enough to protect this tiny but precious strand in the web of creation. I'm also grateful and amazed to discover that I can actually witness this very same happening in my own backyard. We don't have the synchronous flashing species here, but after seeing the sparkly light show in Virginia that night, I knew what to look for when I got back home and when to look for it. So, late on a mid-June night, ideally when it's damp after a rain, a few hours after sunset, if I go out into the yard and sit facing to the north, I will often see them flickering like mad in the tall trees, lighting them up more beautifully and gracefully than any pyrotechnical display. And to think I didn't even know about this until a few years ago. It reminds me so much of my mother, who so recently passed away because of a saying that she loved, and she wrote down in several places so she could see it often. It's an old Jewish Sabbath prayer that simply says, "Days pass, years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles." Thanks, Mom, for reminding me once again. It makes me marvel at the miracles that I have yet to discover. So on to gardening in June. The weather's beautiful and the heat and drought have really not set in yet. For many of our listeners in the more northern zones, this is the beginning of your growing season and you're still planting. Most of the planting here in Zone 7B is already done. But during the fruitful signs, I'll still be dividing and transplanting my natives and perennials. Right now, we're in the waning moon with fertile days for root crops on June 3rd and 4th in Taurus. The new moon's on June 6th, which means we'll be in the waxing phase until the full moon on the 21st. The fruitful planting days during that period, especially for above ground crops that you haven't put in yet, are the 7th, 8th, and 9th in Cancer, the 15th and 16th in Libra, and the 17th through the 19th in Scorpio. And of course, the summer solstice occurs this month. This year it's on June 20th at 4:51 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This is the point at which the days start getting incrementally shorter. While most of the culture lets this event pass with barely a mention, the more I personally lean into the march of the seasons, the more this milestone seems important to mark. Whereas the fall and spring equinoxes feel like shifts in the wheel of the year, a hastening into the next season, the solstices are pivots, literally in the opposite direction, from growing to waning light, as in the case of summer. We live that pivot every month as well with the waxing and waning of the moon. To become conscious of these rhythms is an opportunity to integrate them into the flow of our own days, weeks, and months, and to allow these shifts as they're reflected in our bodies and indeed our earthly lifespan. It's not for any of us to know where we are on this road between our birth and our death, but the summer solstice is a beautiful reminder that there is a point where we have more days behind us than before us. That point isn't clear to anyone up to a certain age, and we're so fond of using the term middle-aged, that sweeping, vague euphemism that we use to describe what comes after so-called youth. Where middle-aged ends, no one wants to say, but if one is to crunch the numbers, so to speak, it's not difficult to gauge the summer solstice of the typical human lifespan. But here's the beauty in embracing that. As always, looking to the metaphors of nature and the garden to enlighten our thinking, there is that point after the bursting forth of life and growth in the spring where things are done, accomplished, goals met, and it's time to slow down and look around at everything that's been accomplished, to watch things grow, to bask in the sun and the color and the freedom of it. And there's so much yet to come as summer progresses, the fullness of the flowers, the garden harvest, the days still long for weeks and months to come. So much room for celebration and joy. Even as the days are getting shorter, there's no shortage of beauty and wonder in the waning light. The highlight of the garden this month for me is all the berries, even the ones that are just showing up in the landscape without being cultivated. Starting with the strawberries in May begins what I call the berry parade. As the strawberries wane, the mulberries make their entrance, soon to be joined by gooseberries, goomyberries, raspberries, and blueberries. There are also all the trees around, the black cherries and the sweet cherries, and the Nanking cherry bushes, which I planted years ago, now ripening. And just as June is ending, the blackberries are ripening up in time for a 4th of July pie. But we won't get ahead of ourselves, we're still talking about June. It's interesting to think about why summer begins with such a burst of sweet fruits. Is it because early humans and animals were coming out of winter hibernation when food was scarce, and they needed the energy boost to help them get going and active again for the season of hunting and gathering? It's so fascinating that plants and animals might be that much in synchronicity with the earth. It's not something that we have a chance to think about unless we're eating seasonally. But when you do choose to eat this way, the appearance of each one of these fresh berries as summer unfolds is a special treat. Yes, of course you can go to Costco and get a giant bag of frozen organic berries of any kind, any time of the year, and they're good. But if you're willing to let berries be for summer as they ripen in succession, you'll experience them in a whole new way. And the ice cream and pies that you can make from the market or garden fresh fruits will take you to a whole new level of summer goodness. Speaking of pies, this month in the Seasonal Kitchen, I'm going to tell you how to make an easy berry pie from scratch. One that you can whip up after the farmer's market on Sunday morning and have it for lunch. Here's how I do it, using our friend and chef Kate Hill's pâté brisé as a crust. Simply use half butter to flour with a pinch of salt. For one pie, I use a half cup butter to a cup of flour. I use chilled butter cut into small chunks, or I take a cheese grater and grate it straight into the flour. Add an egg and 1 or 2 tablespoons of very cold water. And for a berry pie, I add 1 tablespoon of sugar. Mix it all up with my hands until it forms a ball. Roll it out using plenty of flour to keep it from sticking and press it into the pie pan. And I save the extra pastry dough for a lattice topping. Now for the filling. Let's take 4 to 6 cups of berries, 1 tablespoon of sugar, or more if you want it sweeter, but I don't want to overwhelm the natural berry flavors. And about a tablespoon of cornstarch. Add a splash of lemon juice for pizzazz, mix it all up together, and let it sit for a few minutes to help draw out the sweetness. After the mixture is somewhat syrupy, strain off the extra liquid and fill the pie crust, topping with the lattice pastry if you want. Bake it at 350 until the berries are fully cooked and the pastry is a golden brown. And there you have it, a berry pie. I don't have to tell you this, but fresh cream is an amazing and delicious accompaniment to this iconic seasonal dessert. So that's about it for this month. But before I go, I want to remind you that you can still order seeds from our friends at Pine Tree Garden Seeds. Just go to superseeds.com and use our promo code GoodDirt2024 for 20% off your entire order. Also, don't forget you can still order your organic fertilizers for the rest of the growing season at www.neptunesharvest.com and use the code GOODDIRT, GOODDIRT, at checkout for 5% off your order. We will link these codes in the show notes. And so I'll close with the opening lines of the poem June by James Russell Lowell. He says, "And what is so rare as a day in June? Then, if ever, come perfect days." I agree completely with all of my heart, and I hope that you too can find the joy of June. And as you move through this beautiful month, I hope you'll take with you this reminder from the old Jewish Sabbath prayer that my mother loved so much. Days pass, years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. So look for those miracles, and I'll be back next month.